Pray with me. Dear God, give me the right words, speak through me, and allow my words to be the right ones. Amen. For I know the plans I have for you. This is what the book of Jeremiah tells us. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. This scripture has led and dictated my whole life in one way or another. However, I think I have misunderstood its definition and maybe interpretation over the years many, many times. Let me explain. When I was 22 years old, which seems like a little while ago, and newly married to Scott, 3 weeks out of college, which Emily's quickly getting to, I was clear what my own plans were for Scott and me, and I thought God would go along with the plan. I wanted to have a husband, check. Place to live, check. Job, check. And start paying off debts to work towards buying our home. Not major things. Surely God would go along with that plan. As the next 4 years passed, Scott and I moved a few times, adding 2 children to the mix along the way. I figured God would be okay with the tweak in the plan, especially since we had found a church family, brought the kids there. God keeps scoring these things, right? Positive brownie points for taking the kids to church within the first few weeks of life. Baptism before one. All scoring points with the big guy, right? So we grew our family, spent time with our expanding extended church family, scout and work families, did our due diligence with our finances, got the kids involved in school, church, and sporting things, especially Emily's favorite appearances as shepherd number 2, as she often likes to glowingly mention, and moved along gaining positive family points because that's how life works, right? The plan, the prospering, the not harming, the hoping, the building for the future thing. As with all things, I believed in this plan. You know, the grand master plan that the Lord declares in Jeremiah to give us hope and a future. But I figured that it would be my hope, my future. I must say that on a side note, I think we sometimes forget that those plans within His plans, there might be a detour from our plans. And even though His plans have hope and purpose and future, there may be struggle, physical, emotional, mental, financial, or all of the above struggle. It might not be in our plan exactly, at all. His plan might be totally different. Kind of like when grandma wants you to go to school and meet the rich, handsome doctor, and you go to school and you meet the unemployed drummer. Don't worry, never happened to me. Scott will tell you I married a man. Yeah. Anyway, time moved on, and so must my story. So, my family got busy as time and life moved on. Priorities seemed to change a little bit. We still spent time with God. My plans and God's were still connected and on the same track, but sometimes and some days I began to question. There were times that I began to question and wonder and worry. And then when bad things happen, you question it all. You wonder if you asked for far too many trivial things. Or were you too greedy? I spent so much of that first year or year and a half in shock and denial after Nathan passed. Very much in a fog. So much time wondering where I had gone wrong, when the plan must have clearly gone off the rails, and I must have misunderstood something in those signs from God. I spent time praying and asking God why. I spent so much time wondering why some people get the answers to their prayers that they asked for, and I had not. I don't remember much of that time in the fog, but I do remember noticing when the fog was less. I remember feeling that each day somehow felt a little brighter, less heavy. I stopped asking questions of why because I came to realize that those questions were the wrong ones. There was never going to be an answer to that question that I was going to be content with. There was never going to be a grand master plan where Nathan not being here would be acceptable to me. So a shift happened in my mind. I began searching for the answer to, what's the new plan? And what do you want me to do now? These questions seemed to have less overwhelming answers. I was able to start seeing other people who needed a lifeline, needed someone to talk to, others who had lost their children. Some had even lost their children in more tragic ways than I, and I began to feel hope. Hope that my future was to help them find their way. Just as Christ holds up a lamp for us to show us the way home, I had found purpose in these situations. I feel blessed that God has trusted me with these families, and that these families trust me to support them because, let's face it, we all know how crazy that can be, and how crazy I can be. But it has been almost 6 years walking around in this wilderness since Nathan last walked this earth. I still don't see all parts of God's plan for me or my life, but I have learned a few things along the way. 1, God gave us Nathan for 16 years, 11 months, and 16 days. I was blessed and grateful. 2, I told Nathan I loved him every one of those days, and he knew. 3, God still has a purpose for me on this earth. 4, I will continue until he calls me home. 5, I do all these things for and with the one who gives me strength. And lastly, for all these things, I'm eternally grateful. I will do my best to continue to follow his words and his plan to the best of my ability. Do I know where all that leads me next? No. But that's where you all enter the picture. 25 years ago this fall, Scott and I came to this church, and we found a home. We baptized and confirmed our children here. We mourned the loss of one here. Then, 2 years ago, I began another journey. Tonight, that will come full circle, which I appreciate. 2 years ago, I started a journey to understand how the accident that ended Nathan's life happened. I found answers, found healing, and found peace. God walked with me through that journey from start to not quite finish. God used my voice to tell his story to the world, a story of hope and peace and grace, and one day, hopefully, forgiveness. For me, for my family, and for the offender that needs to forgive himself. These things are all part of the plan. Not my plan. Not your plan. God's plan. You can either sit and listen and follow along, or not. But in the end, the only thing left is God's hope, God's grace, God's future, God's plan, God's way, given to us as a gift.